Welcome to this episode of the Justice Team podcast on the Justice Team Network, where we give practical how-tos for lawyers and, everyday folk to be able to make them understand the law and how it works. And today we are very honored to have on the Insurance Avenger. That's actually her Instagram handle, the Insurance Avenger, Sara McClain.
Good morning.
Yeah. So Sara is one person that I lean on for advice on insurance policies and things like this because it's a very specialized area of law.
Yes, or boring, as some people like to describe it.
All right, give some folks just your background and how you got to love, reading these policies and analyzing them.
Well, I don't think it'll come as any surprise that I didn't grow up wanting to be an insurance lawyer. It was something that I fell into after law school. I graduated in 2009. Best time to be looking for a job as a new lawyer. And a firm that was hiring for a particular case that was going to trial. It was a rescission case involving an insurance application with misrepresentations. And I was hired exclusively for that case. And I got an 1,800-page claim file and put it in crawl order and started to look into this case. And it was a woman who it was her third house fire.
Wow.
And it happened within a short period after the policy was applied for. And so it became a lot more fascinating than about, misrepresentations and reliance and all that other stuff that I really barely passed in law school anyways. And I just really enjoyed it. And it was something I was really good at. And it made sense to me. And so I just went with it.
Because, I've done enough of those we call them third-party bad faith cases to realize that insurance companies will find any way to try to rescind a policy, deny coverage, all these type of exclusions. And if you don't know how to fight back, that kind of sucks. So can you give our listeners and viewers an understanding of the difference between like what we consider a first-party claim against insurance and a third-party claim?
Yeah, of course. So a first-party claim is a claim that you make under your own insurance policy, and that can be whether it's homeowners policy with property damage, under obviously your auto policy if you've got comprehensive, things like that. And then a third-party claim is if you are making a claim against someone else's policy, and most typically we see that with the liability coverage.
Yeah, and I know you're doing a lot of work for the fire victims here in Southern California, so I want to use that as a use case here. So, Altadena, Pasadena, Sierra Madre areas, the third party, the person responsible is Edison, right? I want to concentrate on the first party stuff because, we're doing the best we can. They're not like super experienced first party coverage lawyers to give general advice, but again, we like to lean on you. So can you kind of walk us through your process whenever people come to you, because we have different buckets of folks. First, let's talk about people that do have insurance on their properties that burn down. What are the steps that you take?
Okay, so we're dealing with homeowners. I mean, a lot of discussion has been on the homeowners. There's also business owners, obviously, business owners who lost their property, their business, but when it comes to homeowners, number one is I find out who's the insurance company, because then I know what I'm dealing with and sort of what the playing field looks like, and what to expect and how to prepare for that. And then I want to look obviously at their policy, mainly their declarations, so that I understand what their coverages are and what their limits are. And obviously, I know a lot of people have been talking about underinsurance, and that is unfortunately a real issue.
Yeah, nobody has more insurance for the value of their home. We're seeing anyway, right?
Right.
Nobody's overinsured. Yeah, so on the declaration page, homeowners, they want to know what coverages do I have? What can I recoup? What are the things that you're seeing on these policies?
Well, I'm seeing people realize, obviously we've got like the dwelling coverage. Your standard homeowners policy is going to have dwelling coverage, which is going to cover the house, other structures, which is going to cover basically anything that's affixed to the land that is not your house. So your garage, your pool, fences, sheds, things like that.
Your garden, all these things.
So
that's other structures.
Not with the garden quite. So there's a separate coverage for that for trees, shrubs, and landscaping. So it all really depends on what the policy, what the policy language is. And so, but you want to look for those coverages on the declarations page. It won't have any detail about that coverage, but at least you know that, okay, I've got dwelling for this much, I've got other structures for this much, personal property, and then either some policies call it loss of use, others call it additional living expenses.
So yeah, so whenever the rent, because people ask like, can I go rent? What coverages do I have? So they're looking for loss of use. So what are the terms that, because there's different policies, just so everybody's listening. Insurance label things different ways per company. So what should we be looking at to see if there's rental coverage?
Okay, so rental coverage actually can be one of the trickier coverages because you don't own the building structure, but you still have an insurable interest in certain components of the building because.
Oh, that's I mean, if on your insurance policy, if people say you own your home and there's a provision on it I got to go rent somewhere now because my house burned down.
Okay.
What's that coverage called?
Okay, so that's additional living expenses or loss of use.
Okay.
Under fair plan policies, it's called fair rental value because that coverage is a little bit different. But the standard homeowners policy is going to have loss of use, and the overall coverage insuring provision allows for reimbursement for any expenses that are incurred. Incurred is an important word. Any expenses that are incurred in order for a insured to maintain their normal standard of living.
Yeah. So when they see that number, it's usually a gross number, like $200,000.
Yeah, it's usually a lot of the coverages other than dwelling are a percentage of your dwelling coverage. So a lot of people don't know that they need to look at that number and adjust it and see, what would it take, how much would I spend in rent? If I've got unique animals that I can't keep with me in a rental, the boarding cost for that and things like that. It's something that a lot of people don't really think about. But that limit that's on your policy, if you've got a dollar limit, that is unfortunately going to be the cap of what the insurance company is required to pay.
And is that, could you rent one place for 1 month for $200,000 if that's the cap, or, what's the play?
So there's a difference between what the policy covers and allows for versus what is going to work for an individual insured in the long run. There are people who their homes were 5,000, 6,000 square feet, but they only have, say, like maybe $300,000 in loss of use coverage. And if you're looking at an 18 months to 24 month rebuild period, you're going to run out of that money if you insist on having a rental that is the same as your prior home. And so people are just being practical about that and also being realistic about the housing market and really what's available. So
you got to kind of take that number and see if you can stretch it out 18 months, 24 months for the rebuild process.
Right.
Wow.
It's like going back to college and having to do that budgeting that is so difficult.
And most everyone's going to be underinsured with the housing market here in Southern California. So how do they make up the difference?
Well, it just depends on where, what their circumstances are, what resources they have, especially with a lot of the generational families. A lot of them have been staying with each other. But there are a lot of other resources out there for assistance. And I have to say, I was born and raised in LA. I know I'm a San Diego Padres fan now.
Yeah, we see the shirt. Yeah. We'll let the comments talk about that.
Yeah, that's all right. Friar faithful here. But I am overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and commitment by so many community members and so many organizations, and it really is very encouraging for the community in the long run. But there is FEMA assistance. There is the SBA, the Small Business
Will FEMA
Administration.
help if you're underinsured?
So yes, but the question that I still am wondering is when will that help come? Because they want you to exhaust all your funding sources.
So let's use the situation. We have a lot of generational families in Altadena that they lose their home. They will then stay with a family member, but say that they have this rental coverage on their policy. Can they have their family member charge them rent so that the insurance pays? Like what do we do in this situation?
So it's interesting that you bring that up. And my number one piece of advice is just be very careful about how you're handling that part of the claim and how you are transacting things and documenting it. Just because it's kind of a excuse me, it's a little bit of a confusing coverage. It really is one of those it depends kind of things, because it's whatever you need to maintain your normal standard of living. And you and I, one person to the next has a different standard of living. And even though you're staying with a family member and you would otherwise have to pay rent if they weren't letting you stay for free, unless you are actually handing that money over and incurring an obligation. And that's why I mentioned before about that being a really
So
important
get a
word.
rental contract and really go through the
Yeah.
process. I mean, I'm of the sense, if you had insurance and you're paying for it, exhaust every single penny that you can.
Oh,
That's the way I
absolutely.
feel about it.
Policy limits.
Policy limits. So a homeowner comes in, say their house burnt down and they're obviously don't have enough coverage. What steps do they do next?
So, well, first is to make the claim with the insurance company, and get them to pay out everything that they owe.
And you just write a letter and say, pay my policy limits. Total burn. Here's the photos. Pay it.
If anyone is able to do that easily, I'd love to know.
Well, they give you 30% up front, right? They say, here's 30% of the policy up front.
Right. So
We'll send an adjuster over to take a photo to make sure everything's damaged, right?
Right. So at the core of every insurance claim is the insurance company's duty to investigate. And that scope of duty, it applies no matter what the circumstances are. And so what they have to do to investigate obviously depends on the circumstances of the claim. But in this instance, when it is obvious that the homeowner is underinsured and it is a total loss and it is going to be 18 months to rebuild, they have to have some kind of paper support. They call it supports in the file, right? So that they're not just like throwing money out at, whoever they feel like it. But they need to relax the standard and the rigidness of their standards for what is sufficient to justify that payment.
Yeah, and there's the other part of the coverage. So we have dwelling, we have rental use, other structures, and then we have other personal property, right? That's a big one.
OPP.
OPP. You know me, naughty by nature, stretch. So OPP, your
Right.
personal property. Coverage for that. But that's the one that's the gray area, right? Because sometimes they're like, well, did you really have X amount of in your home?
Right. Yeah. So if you have a water damage claim, obviously demonstrating your personal property losses is relatively easy because everything's still intact. Fire is very difficult. Every single homeowner's policy has a requirement that you submit an itemized inventory with some of the most ridiculous details that nobody can remember, like how much you paid for that sofa that you bought in 1996 or something like that. But it is a standard policy and it's required in order to substantiate the amount of losses. But insurance companies are supposed to be reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Because when they are not reasonable, then they get sued for bad faith. But
And I think this is the more gray where I think insurance companies could trip up, because if they really, it's like, I mean, come on, people's houses burn down, you have X amount of coverage. Like, obviously, you could take a look at people's social media and be like, yeah, their home, the contents of their home and personal property is very likely over that. So let's not mess around.
right. And that's really what they should be doing, especially in the total loss circumstances. Unfortunately, right now they're not. That being said, there was a bill recently introduced to the state legislatures that would mandate the insurance companies to waive the requirement that you submit the itemized
That'd be
inventory
great.
in instances of total loss. And shout out to my former high school classmate and ASB president, Ben Allen, who is now
nice.
a state legislature. And he proposed that bill. So
Ben Allen's been a huge ally for consumers and victims. I mean, I've never met him, but I could see the bills that he writes and supports. So, Ben Allen, if you ever want to come on the show, you're a huge advocate for everything that we believe in. So we'd love to talk to you.
and we'll have a Samo High reunion.
There we go. So we went through, you file a claim. This is some of the things we do. Let's talk about another bucket of folks, renters. I get a lot of questions about renters, business renters and homeowner renters? What are their rights?
Right. And so I'm one of those people that I know what toys I have to play with in my sandbox. And so in that instance, I talk to landlord tenant attorneys who are more familiar with the nuances of landlord rights and things like that. If a renter, the issue that I'm seeing with renters is that they get the stuff handled for what they have coverage for. So their personal property, their additional living expenses.
But under which policy?
So there's a renter's insurance has got there's a renter's insurance policy, and it basically covers everything except the structure.
So that's if they have a renter's policy.
Correct. And it depends. I think you can get structures coverage on a renter's policy just because of what is defined as part of the building. If you bought if you made improvements to your apartment or your condo, that's part of the realty, but that's still yours, and so that should be covered under building. But what I'm seeing with renters is they're having issues with the landlords not doing the necessary repairs, cleaning, taking the situation seriously with respect to the building. And in those instances, we have the implied warranty of habitability.
So that's when the landlord, the owner of the property, implied warranty. It means you got to make good on your property, right? If you're renting to somebody, and it's implied that you'll do it in good faith.
Right.
So you have a landlord. So I get this question a lot, like, landlord won't let me back onto the premises, even to sift through my ashes. Landlord won't let me back in, or not rehabbing the building yet if it wasn't totally burnt down. What do we do in these situations?
Read your lease, read your rental agreement, go to the contract. There are laws that apply to landlord-tenant relationships, but then there's also the contract, and that's what I say with insurance claims too. Is what does the policy say?
So the policy is a contract between you and your insurance company.
Yes.
Renter, look at your insurance between you and the landlord, whether you're a business or renter of your personal home.
Yeah, no, I mean, and especially too, because some language, the language in those leases differs. But at the, and often there is a provision that if the property becomes uninhabitable, that the tenant is allowed to break the lease, and then can go free and clear. The rules regarding, if somebody does do that, the rules regarding security deposits obviously still apply. So and I will say with the landlord tenant issues, there are a lot of organizations and agencies that specialize in helping tenants and advising them of their rights. So I definitely encourage anybody that's got issues with their landlords to reach out, because I think that is definitely a particularly vulnerable population, or segment of the population that's being affected.
So how about this situation, this last topic, just homeowner, property owner has a renter. It burns down. Homeowner has a policy for rental value, loss of rental value. Now, they weren't living there, they were renting it. Can they use that coverage for it's almost like a loss of income for the rental?
What does the policy say?
The typical policy just says
so typical,
because they weren't living there.
Right. And so a typical policy recognizes that is a common occurrence. And so that's the true loss of use or fair rental value coverage. So if you've got an existing tenant and there's a lease and it demonstrates how much you would have received in rent, you can submit that to your insurance company, and they would be required to reimburse you for that. That being said, before I again consult your policy before you take that step, because there could be gray areas, or it could be sort of you didn't realize it didn't have that coverage. So you just always want to be, very careful and do your due diligence and every step of the claim.
Yeah, and that's where you get that number, you divide it by however many months and see if you have enough time to rebuild during that process and still be able to recoup your fair rental value.
Right.
Great. So again, how do people reach you, Sarah?
They can they can send out the bat signal, right? No, they can. I'm on Instagram at the Insurance Avenger. I can be reached at sarah@theinsuranceavenger.com. And if people really want to find me, I'm sure they can get a hold of me one way or another.
Yeah, and Sarah's a new member coming to Justice HQ. We appreciate your insight and building the community and teaching everybody about insurance and stuff like this, because I learned so much on this episode. And, sticking with the Avengers, I think you'd love in a lot of our locations. Like we have a Groot in the Orange County one, and we have a giant Hulk that's actually down in the basement here. So there's a lot of like Avenger adjacent stuff going on here.
Oh, totally. No, it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. Well, thank you for fighting for folks. Like Sarah's been like literally boots on the ground, helping people, whether in a church or like in a parking lot, giving people advice.
Outside of the back of my minivan.
Yeah.
Shout out to the minivan mafia.
Yeah. Minivans are awesome. You can put a lot of stuff in there.
Oh, don't get me started. We could do a whole episode on that.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice Team podcast on the Justice Team Network. You can go to thejusticeteamnetwork.com or you can watch on YouTube or anywhere it is. But please reach out to Sarah with any insurance questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.